We are back, and I hand it over to Tiffany to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to some of you. I am Tiffany Marley, the Project Director for the Partnerships Learning Communities Resource Center. And we would like to welcome you to today's national webinar presentation, Trends in Poverty. Just to center our conversation for today, I thought it would be helpful for us to focus a little bit on what the Learning Communities Resource Center is or what its purpose is. And really, its purpose is to help build the network's capacity as it relates to anti-poverty practices or strategies. And at the end of the day, as we think about this work around improving our strategies, it relates to our ability to fight poverty more effectively, because this anti-poverty work is at the heart, or rests at the heart of who we are as a network. And at the end of the day, we want to increase those outcomes for the families and communities that we serve. I'd like to quote Jeannie Chapin from OCS. She had this to say about the LCRC work. As a network, we must be focused on the right issues to address poverty today. We have to be in tune with these issues and reflect on and create strategies that have impact. And so as we were thinking about the work of the LCRC, as we call it, we convened several learning community groups that focus on various anti-poverty topic areas. In addition to that, we feel that it's very important to share or to disseminate what we are learning as we go broadly to the network as often as possible, so that we can all engage in conversations and thoughts about how to fight poverty more effectively. And so as we think about the national webinar series, our focus will be on themes related to specific anti-poverty approaches, and this will be our way to showcase what we're doing well and what we're doing that is innovative to meet the broader needs of the families and communities that are being served. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Denise Carlos, who is the CEO of the partnership. She's going to offer some remarks for us. Denise?
Great. Thank you, Tiffany, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We are thrilled that you're here today as part of our kickoff series here with our National Trends in Poverty. We ran a series similar to this during our last funding cycle through OCS, and we had some of the largest registrations we've had for our webinar series. And again, today we have a really good-sized group on today's call, which I think really shows certainly the interest in the network to really look at some of the macro issues impacting families and impacting our communities. We know that Paul Ryan has been paying a lot of attention and getting a lot of airtime around his poverty work. We know that the Kemp Foundation held their presidential forum this past January, addressing issues around poverty and economic security. And we know that poverty is in the lexicon. We've been seeing reports coming out of Brookings and the American Enterprise Institute. We know the Gates Foundation has made a big investment at the Urban Institute to elevate the issue of poverty and to talk about strategies that can be impactful. And I know we're going to have Jim and Alan walking us through the core of today's session. And every time I hear them talk about the research they've done on trends in poverty, it can feel sometimes a bit overwhelming, because we really are talking systematic issues and needing systematic change if we're going to dramatically impact poverty in our country today. But that's not saying that we aren't ready for these challenges. That's not to say we're not ready to set an advocacy agenda that can impact those systematic issues. And I'm, again, thrilled that so many of you are on today's call, and I hope that you continue to engage in this webinar series looking at the national trends in poverty, and continue to push us here at the partnership, as well as our other colleague national partners, to make sure we're focusing on broad issues impacting families today who are struggling. And we always like to start off our sessions with the promise of community action, and we're not going to ask everyone to repeat it out loud, but I know as you read the slides you'll hear it in your head. But I think it's always a good touchstone for us that truly community action, we are here, we change people's lives, we embody the spirit of hope, we improve communities, and we really try to make America as a whole a better place to live. We do care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. Some of you were I know, at the NCAP meeting a couple weeks ago, and we were hearing about how families in poverty may be thinking about things, and I'm not sure we always agreed necessarily with what was being talked about, because I believe we do come from a spirit of hope in community action. And while Alan and Jim today will walk us through some of the challenges, please know that we stand with you to try to impact these issues on a systematic level. So, Tiffany, I'm going to turn the ball back over to you.
Thank you very much, Denise. And just to say a little bit more about the way forward. So the poverty trends piece is actually a series that will be facilitated by Jim Masters and Alan Stansbury for us over the course of the next several months. And really, today's conversation is going to focus more so on the causes and the conditions of poverty as we just try to check back in with our sort of foundational understandings of just what is happening on the national landscape around poverty and what the relevant statistics are. This time around with the learning community, our hope is to also make what we are learning as a result of this series as practical as possible. So to think about what the theory of change might look like around this work, especially on the local level, and then also talk about ways that we might be able to talk more effectively about poverty or engage in advocacy work on the local level to engage our stakeholders in this work with us. And so without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Jim Masters, who is not a stranger to our network at all. Jim has been a critical voice for us around not only this topic, but just key policy issues impacting the network from Head Start to just many other areas. And you see his bio there, and he is joined by his colleague Alan Stansbury. Both of them work for the Center for Community Futures, and there again, both of them have worked heavily around issues impacting America's working poor and raising the awareness around what the realities are, as I have said, but also what we can possibly do as anti-poverty agents to help the situation. So without further ado, I am going to pass the baton over to Jim, who is going to start with today's presentation. Thank you. And thank you, Denise, for your remarks.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Cashin. We're going to start with an overview of I'm going to click on the next slide here. This is today's presentation is part of the Learning Community Resource Center, or the LCRC, as the partnership is calling it. You know it's important when it gets its own acronym, right? Alan and I today are going to look at some national trends. The big drivers in any society are the demographics, the characteristics of the population itself, the belief systems, what people believe, hope for, and are afraid of, the economy, particularly globalization, automation, offshoring, corporate practices, the failure of the government to deal with economic trends, and then the little bobbing boat on the sea of these other three big elements of the ocean, the politics, how these other three things grind together to try to produce agreements or not about what we as a society are going to do about it. So we're going to start with a few slides on demographics. We're going to look at other trends in poverty around family characteristics. We're going to look at wage and salary trends, the very weak recovery from the 2008-9 recession, what Alan and I and some economists call the new normal, and then look at income and asset inequality, and then we will wrap up talking about the white paper that Alan and I are drafting for the partnership, and I'll make a few comments about how this all fits with Roma Next Gen and IM 138, the new performance standards. So let me say that all the slides in this presentation, and there's about 70 of them, will be up on the partnership website that you can download and select out the specific slides that you want to use with your staff or board or in your planning process. Secondly, many of these slides are sort of the theoretical or national trend, and Alan and I are going to prepare a toolkit that talks about how you use the information in that specific slide in your local community assessment process. So here we go, talking about demographic mega trends, and the highlights are we have a declining birth rate in the U.S., but more mothers who are single heads of households. Life expectancy is going up, in particular for whites, but it's inconsistent in terms of minorities, and also life expectancy essentially reflects educational attainment. The less education you have, the shorter life. Very interesting set of dynamics there. The changing composition of the family. Women are having children later, up to about age 27 now, from age 21 just a couple of decades ago. The growing ethnic diversity of America and the aging workforce. So if we look at the declining birth rate, the point being that like many Western industrial societies, we are barely hitting our replacement rate, and if it wasn't for immigrants, we wouldn't be replacing a population. A little more on the declining birth rate. Increasing in life expectancy, largely a function of better nutrition, health care. We see that it's going up, but not, it's even increasing among blacks, but not at the same rate as it is among whites. So it's still a lot of a gap between ethnicity and education as well. Here's probably the most illustrative chart of this, showing the composition of the population by age group. You see the number under age 15 in 1970, this number under age 15 2015, and then the projection for 2060. This is a global projection, but I think the same chart is illustrative of the U.S. population trend as well. And what this means is that our retirement system, Social Security, Medicare, are based on the premise that there's a lot of healthy young people at the bottom paying in to support those of us at the top of the pyramid. And essentially, just because of fundamental changes in the composition of the population, the current systems that we have, Social Security and Medicare, are not sustainable over the long run. Changes have to be made, whether you're talking about increasing the retirement age, increasing the amount against which people contribute instead of $116,000 cap going up, increasing the percentage of withdrawals that all of us pay instead of 6.2% going up, and other kinds of changes. And the longer we delay making any changes in these systems, the more dramatic the changes are going to be when the crunch hits. So long-term demographics, an aging population, and fewer young people to support them. Here's the chart on the America's Changing Family, and you'll notice at the lower right, on all these charts, we have the source of the citation for that chart. So when you download this PDF, you can click on these hot links to take you to the source material. The significant thing here about unmarried births isn't the marriage element per se, but rather the number of adults in the household supporting that child. It's very difficult for a single parent, for those of us who've been single parents, and I was for 2 years, this is a challenge, and the number and percent of unmarried births is just going up and presents a challenge that we have some additional thoughts on as we get into the white paper. So this evolving family makeup with an increasing percentage of people who are single parents represents a challenge to society in terms of the single parent earning enough money to support that child and having enough time to have a life in addition to child rearing. So I talked a little bit about the increase in the age at which women are having their first child, and then we have more single households we've talked about. The growing ethnic diversity, and we've got some additional material on this that you'll see in the white paper, but we know that we're becoming a majority-minority nation, and within a few years, for example, California will be a minority state in the sense that no one population group constitutes a majority. And some pretty important changes for politics there as well. Here's a great chart Alan came up with about the percent of a foreign-born population as a total percent of the total population. And we just have to recognize and deal with the fact that we are increasingly a nation of immigrants with large numbers of different population groups living here. Here's an interesting statistic. 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day for the next 19 years. So you remember that chart that we looked at earlier in terms of demographic trends as loading going to the top. Here we go, the aging population, the aging workforce. More people are staying in the workforce as they age, rather than everybody quitting work at age 60 or 65, as we sort of thought was going to happen when we were looking at these projections back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, in part because the retirement systems do not provide sufficient income. We have older people staying in the workforce longer, which reduces the number of job openings for younger people. Okay, I'm going to click on this. Okay. So we've got some of these poverty trends, percent of the poverty and racial ethnic makeup trending upward with more Hispanics in poverty, a somewhat smaller increase in the Asian population, longer unemployment periods, lower household income, and Alan's going to get into this, and the growing number of children in poverty. Here we have the ethnic makeup of the U.S. Population. We call it the poor population. We're now, as you know, changing our language so that it's people with low incomes or people in poverty to try to get away from some of the negative stereotypes of the old language. Here's the unemployment rate and median household income and the connection between them. We're going to go forward here. There's a direct correlation between married and unmarried head of households and poverty, and this is another way of saying single heads of households versus households with 2 or more adults. As many of you have heard me say before, we talk about married couples. My personal thinking has evolved over the years. I don't care if this is a man and a woman, they're related or not. I don't care about gender. What I care about is how many incomes are there in that household to support children. And my opinion is you've got to have 2 or more incomes in a household that has kids in order to make ends meet. Now, okay, here's children in poverty, and some great charts here when you click on these that light up, and the increase in the number of children in poverty and housing and so forth. Okay, Alan, you're going to take over here and talk about wage and salary trends. Am I correct? So Tiffany, Cashin, we're going to switch to Alan as the presenter now.
I assume you can hear me now.
Yes.
Before I start, as part of my introduction, I just want to say that think of these broad areas as topic areas where you want to start with when you do your annual community assessments. And these will give you tips as to where you might focus on, particularly with the demographic areas, and then we'll get into the economy here. Starting with wage and salary trends, and I might also mention that we should try to give you the very, very best information that's non-political, unbiased, and developed by experts in their fields. First, we'll begin with what's been going on since the recession, 2007-2009. We see that jobs are now starting to come back. We're talking about full-time jobs. They're higher now than ever since November of 2008 at the height of the recession. So that's a good first part of the good news. Unemployment rate continues to decline, and we are getting better and better at this all the time. We're now, this is an old slide, but we're now sitting around 5%. And these figures are coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I might also mention that you can drill down in these into these numbers into the county and metropolitan area. Again, this is an old slide. We're more like about 71, 72 months of continuous employment growth. The latest numbers are indicating that maybe we had another 200,000 for the last month of February. Wages are starting to climb back, according to the experts. We're back to 2009 levels, although there's a lot of us that would dispute that, given our own individual situations. Employment growth versus wages between 2008 and 2009, we can see that there's been a good increase in wage growth in some of the different areas. And these are the specific industries showing the growth in the last 2 years. For instance, management shows the very last item in that slide shows that it's been much higher paying. But on the other end of the scale is food preparation, showing the least amount of growth since 2008. Again, you can look at this in perspective of your own local area as to the types of wages that are paid there, and make an extrapolation as to how this looks like in your particular area. Growth rate, the experts are saying we're running around 2.2% growth rate, which is pretty good. However, the big problem is the low, very, very low labor participation rate. And we're looking at the fact that we're about 62% versus a 67% that we normally have. In other words, a 5% drop in the participation rate that we normally would have. And and this is probably an area that you probably find in your own community. Reasons being stagnant wages, an aging workforce, fewer women coming into the workforce, and mismatched skills.
Let me stay on that slide for a second, Alan.
I'll go back to that.
Okay. So what Alan means here by the current low 5% unemployment rate is overstated is that the 5% unemployment rate is overly optimistic and that several million people have actually dropped out of the labor force completely. So by the time you add the unemployed and the dropouts together, and then the people who are working part-time but not, and would like to be working full-time, and the people who are working at a poverty level wage, this is where you come up to the total of 30 to 40 million people who are not making a living because of the structure of the labor market. So in addition to this, the cause of declining participation, Barbara and I were having a conversation the other day about what's a cause and what's an effect. The people are just dropping out of the labor force, which is the cause of the declining participation and also a reflection of it. Okay, Alan, go ahead on the next one.
I'm trying to get my this thing to advance. Okay, here's the important thing to remember is that our wages have pretty much stagnated since 1973. There's been a robust increase in productivity by the average worker, as it shows here, 74% on average, but the wages have never kept up with this. It used to be back when I first got out of college, inflation was a big problem. Wages could never keep up with inflation. Well, productivity is not inflation, but it's kind of the same thing where you can see that more and more productivity throughout the nation, the wages have not kept up with it. And we've decided that the difference, the savings from the productivity has gone into the pockets of the owners and the investors and not back to the workers. In the meantime, we've seen a huge number of middle-income jobs declining. Good paying jobs that they have defined at $18.50 an hour has declined substantially overall between 1979 and 2010. While majority of the males were employed, females employment has those jobs have declined, and female employment has steadily increased. And let me just say here is that this is a clear indication that females are being paid quite a bit less. This income inequality between males and females is partly the reason why more females are being employed, because companies can get away with that. And then we talk a little bit about good jobs requiring a degree. Jobs with only high school degree has fell from 17% to about 5%. And that's what those graphs are about. Let me go up here and we'll show you where all of the jobs have been disappearing and the projection between now and 2024. Again, at your local level, you could be watching for these things, and by following this chart, you can see exactly where you might see that same areas in industry and job classifications might be disappearing in your community. here's another thing that's been ongoing, and that's, far more part-time employment than now than ever before. Usually that is a trend when you go into a recession. You see the full-time employees going into part-time work, and you find that many of the employees, and I'm sure you see this among your the people that you service, they take 2 or more jobs just to keep the income coming in and get a full-time equivalent of hours. I know members in my family, younger generation, are trying to make it on a couple making on at least 3 different jobs and barely making enough to pay for their rent and their normal daily requirements, transportation and food. And here's a big shift in the economy, is that we're going more towards on-demand jobs, and that is to say freelancing, the sharing economy, people who substitute for others, and particularly in education and elsewhere, where they can get away with it. That's a major shift that's happening in our economy, something you can follow in your own local service areas. Here's the percentage that they're coming up with. Career freelancers at 20%, business builders at 22%, side giggers, that would be the Uber drivers, so on and so forth, and those who are substituting for others at 18%. I might mention that this information came out of a company called Intuit. They're the ones that make QuickBooks and TurboTax, and it's the information that they've gathered from their customers that have been fed into this that gives us an idea as to where the these on-demand jobs are coming from. Here's an estimated income, average hourly ranging from $12 to $98, with an average of $28. Not too bad. But the one thing that we can see for sure in our trends analysis is that middle income earners are trending towards what we call the working poor. That is to say that those of you who provide a variety of different services in your area, that you see an increase in need and demand for your services. It's not that the younger generation is coming, younger generation who can't find a job, although being part of it is usually more the middle class have lost their jobs and are no longer earning the wages that they did prior to 2007. And make a note here that half of the long-term unemployed are non-Hispanic whites. That's probably another big growth area in your community. We always like to show this slide. It's from Robert Reich, who's a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, who formerly was the Secretary of Labor under Clinton. This comes out of a lot of his work where he shows how the American economy has evolved since 1947, started what he called the Great Prosperity after World War II. It rose with productivity. Then after 1980, he calls it the Great Regression, where wages didn't increase, but productivity did. And that's, I think, a very good illustration overall in the last 50-plus years.
So, Alan, go back to that slide. I want to talk about that a little more. So, first of all, Robert Reich, you can Google him and go to his own website and get an avalanche of useful information. But this is another version of the slide that you saw earlier, where productivity, in effect, increases in the gross national product continue to go up, but compensation has not tracked it for the last 30-some years. Well, where's this difference going? And why is there a difference? Well, corporations in the 1970s, during the oil embargoes, were stunned at the effect of cutting off their oil, and so they began hoarding cash. Alan will talk about that a little later. But they also figured out that we can send jobs overseas and pay people less. We can begin reducing the defined benefit retirement programs. We can begin reducing health benefits. We can shift our retirement burden to the national pension corporation, the government bailout, and we can take some of this extra money and give it to our investors, the venture capitalists, and the hedge funds, and we can use it to pay our top management. So there's a whole series of things going on here, resulting in the money that used to go to workers now going other places. So this is a good part of the trouble that we are in with people's inability to make a living, and we're going to have a lot more to say about this during the course of the project over the next couple of years. So go on, Alan, and go on from there.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about what has happened since the end of the recession, 2009, to today. We decided in our observations, in our analysis, and it's just not us, it's a lot of other people, that the economy is just simply not normal, despite the steady progress that I outlined earlier. And here is the headlines from a Market Watch, which I forget, is this CBS News, that this was their headline. And so it's not been much of a recovery. The important fact here is that the richest Americans have generally recouped all their losses from the recession. They had the most to lose, and they gained it all back. But at what cost? It was at the cost of the low income and middle class. And as you can see, we have a graph of food stamp recipients. In 2007, there were 26 million recipients, and in 2013, there was almost 50 million. That number has come down a little bit, but nothing to the extent that it was in 2007. Poverty rate, as you all know, is running around 15%, where in 2007, before the recession, it was 12.5%, and the median income in 2007 was $55,627, and now it's about $51,000. In other words, we've taken a hit overall. So here's a slide that goes a little deeper into food stamps. Children in 2014, nearly 1 in 5 children, or about 16 million, were on food stamps, and that's a 50% increase over 2014. And this comes from the census, U.S. Census, that tracks these. I'm trying to go forward here. Here are lost jobs, missing workers, stagnant wages. We talk about the unemployment rate. This is a bit of an old slide. I haven't had a chance to update it. But you can see that, again, we watched the low participation rate sitting around 62.8%. And then share unemployment out of work for 6 months or more, 34.4% at the middle of 2014. We still have that problem even today. Here we show the lagging of wages You can show where we saw a big hit, a minus number between 2011 and 2012, even into 2000 and end of 2012, a little bit in 2014. Again, these come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We'll go to the next slide here if I can get this to work. Okay. Inequality. This comes out of the LA Times, which actually reproduced a graphic from the Financial Times of London. And it can show, once again, how the middle income and the lower income has pretty much dissipated since 1971 through 2015. And all of that has accrued to the far right hand, the upper income, 200,000 or plus. We're talking a percentage of almost 8%, up from about 1% in 1971. So that's a substantial increase over the last 45 years. Going to the next one. I'm going to go quickly through this. This is a big chart which I've taken apart and shown you in a few additional slides. These are the indicators which the Federal Reserve used to decide on increasing the interest rate back on December. And the first one was job openings rate. Now at 3.6%, whereas before it was at 3%. Layoffs, discharges have dropped to 1.2%, down from 1.4%. Non-farm payrolls have now increased slightly. And here's the unemployment rate they were looking at. It's about the same since October of 2009. This is a part-time unemployment rate at 9.9% as of today. Hires rate, in other words, workers hired as a percentage of paid employees. This isn't all that good, but you can see it's on the upturn. And here we have those who are quitting and going on to other jobs. And you can see at one time that turnover was at 2.1%. In February of 2010, it was 1.3%, and now it's upward again to almost 2%. And this is a good indicator that shows that people are feeling more relaxed about seeking better employment, higher salaries, better conditions, etc. We still haven't really done very well with the long-term unemployment share. At one time it was less than 20%, now it's at 25.7%. Back in April 2010 it was 45.3%. And again, we look at this bugaboo of the labor petition rate at being at 32.5% today, down from 66% in 2009. Okay, this shows you the gross domestic product. It shows where we were capable of doing better, but we haven't quite gotten to where we should be, partly because of those factors we noted before. Here's the big thing that I firmly believe is why it's holding us back, is that corporations and others are just hoarding trillions and trillions of dollars and not putting it into investments. There's 2.5 trillion sitting in U.S. banks. This trend started back in 2009, and before that, there was never more than a billion or $1.5 billion held, you know, aside for whatever purpose. It could be emergency or making a future purchase or whatever. And what's interesting out of this $2.5 trillion is $0.5 trillion, 20% in other words, are in endowments of 832 universities and colleges. And there's a move afoot that some of these colleges have such a huge endowment that they should be cutting their tuition substantially and pushing towards admitting more low-income students. Here's a graphic from our local newspaper showing where the billions are being stashed offshore by our big internet and high-tech companies. Google's got 64 billion, Amazon 17 billion, Cisco's got 52 billion, Apple's got 155 billion offshore, eBay's got about $6 billion offshore. Add this up, you've got $2.1 trillion deposited and stashed in accounts in offshore banks that aren't doing anything other than to acquire another company. And in my estimation, that doesn't really do a whole lot to generate more jobs. Mergers and acquisitions are fine on creating efficiency, but as productivity goes up, we're not seeing where the productivity benefits are accruing to the workers. So to conclude, we've got $4.6 trillion of cash that's unused, not invested, and the reasons for this, according to some of the experts, to hedge against future recessions, banks meeting new Federal Reserve requirements, tax avoidance, that's a big one, and is held for acquisitions of startups and buying competitors. But as I said before, it doesn't create jobs. Okay, household income, assets accumulation trends to higher income brackets. And we're going to talk about income and asset inequality here. I think it's probably one of the biggest things that keep America from moving ahead and ending a substantial amount of poverty. So back in 2001, after President Bush became president and the Republican Congress, they enacted the 2001 Bush tax cuts, capping capital gains at 15%. And because of that, people are able to save a whole lot more. They're not really reinvesting, even though that was the whole reason, the basis for these tax cuts is for reinvesting. And so what have we got? 20 to 30 years of wage salary stagnation. Poverty has become mainstream. The middle class is matched in size by those in the economic tiers above and below it. And most importantly, accelerating growth and inequality. According to Pew Research, and I recommend highly that whenever you can, go to Pew Research for your information. It's probably the best out there. The middle class is no longer the majority. It used to be that the middle class was the keystone, the foundation of which American economy was built on, and no longer it's there. It's pretty much just diminished, as you can see from this graph. Back in 1961, the middle class was considered to be 61%. Today, we're sitting about 50%.
So before you leave that slide, Alan, I just want to say, I think this illustrates a challenge for community action because my perception is that we've been in the business of selling the American dream, the idea that anybody that works hard and plays by the rules and so forth can make it in America, can become middle class. Well, I think you could argue that that was true from the end of the Second World War up into the 1970s, but I think that it's true now for a decreasing percentage of the population. And we'll have a lot more to say about this during the course of the 2-year project. Okay, go on to the next slide, Alan.
So here's the rise of the 0.01%. This is the top end of our of the upper income folks, and as you can see from our graphic here, that the rich has gotten a lot richer.
I don't understand this graphic. Could you explain it in more detail?
Well,
7%. Oh, I see. The population of the 1.01% was 7. They had 7% of the wealth in 1979. Now they have 22%.
In 2012.
Yeah, and the remainder of the population has 28%.
That's right.
What's the brown line? Well, the lowest 90% of the population have 22% of the wealth. The richest 0.01% also have 22% of the wealth.
Yeah, and that's where the line is crossing in 2012. In other words, the brown line is the poorest 90%. You can see their wealth is going down.
Right.
And the kind of the yellow line is an upward trend. Back in '96, they were 9.3%. Now they're 22%. So now they're crossing. The two lines are now crossing.
Okay, got it.
And so one of the reasons is the average worker pay gap between the CEO and the labor force within the organization. And guess who has got the largest pay gap ratio? It's the CEO at McDonald's, a 644% differential. And you can see that many of these organizations that are listed here employ people at the bottom end of the economy as far as salaries go. We have healthcare, you have banks, you have financial companies such as American Express. You would think that you wouldn't think that there was over 200 pay gap ratio between the CEO of American Express and their average worker, but that's what it is. And this comes from Bloomberg, who tracks all of this information. And here's the health trends by income. As you can tell, that from this graph, we're showing here that the middle class is the one that's being hurt the most, and this is from the Federal Reserve. Here's another Pew Research graphic showing the wealth gap between the upper and middle income households, now standing at record highs. The upper income has got a wealth gap of 6.6 times greater than the median income. Going ahead here. The Institute for Policy Studies did a report on the Forbes 400 richest people in the world. And their findings were that the 20th wealthiest people could comfortably fit in one single Gulfstream luxury jet, but own more wealth than the bottom half of the American population combined, a total of 152 million people in 57 million households. The Forbes 400 now own as much wealth as the entire African American population, plus more than a third of the Latino population combined together. That gives you just a sense of how much these folks, these 400 people that lead the American economy hold as far as their wealth. And this goes on to talk about how the wealthiest 100 households own more than the wealth of the entire African American population in the U.S. among the Forbes 400. And the wealthiest 186 members of the Forbes 400 own as much wealth as the entire Latino population in the U.S. So their combined worth is 2.34 trillion, more than all the wealth in the bottom 61% of the country combined, 194 million people. Just some facts that you might want to reflect on. And bottom line, income inequality means a lack of inequality in opportunities. We have this whole idea of our war on poverty was opportunity, equal opportunity for jobs, housing, and so on. And that's not what's happening in the last few years. During the 10-year period, 2002 to 2012, the U.S. Census Bureau estimates that the inflation adjustment income of median household has declined from $54,000 to $51,000, and the mean income has fell from $74,000 to $71,000, and that has been taken up by all the funds that have gone into the upper incomes. Okay, Jim, this is where you come in. We don't hear you, Jim.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We have a set of trends over the past 30 years here that economists are just now beginning to fully grasp the implications of this and to see the implications for society. I think this is a real challenge for the U.S. government, if you will, in that these trends that are the result of automation, all of the jobs that have been lost, the bank tellers and the gas station attendants and so forth that have been lost to automation, a reduction in the number of employment opportunities due to offshoring, sending jobs to other countries, whether through NAFTA, sending jobs to the maquiladoros along the Mexican border, or other trade agreements that have allowed corporations to shift jobs to lower wage countries. You've got corporate practices taking advantage of the rules under which the economy operates to reduce the number of jobs that they have, or to reduce benefits, or to reduce compensation. So we've got a whole series of negative trends here that are making it increasingly difficult for people to make a living. And Alan and I do not see any reversal of these trends in the near term. Hopefully some presidential candidate is going to wave magic wands and change things, but the fundamental underlying structural dynamics of the economy are moving in a way that making it much more difficult for people with low incomes to make a living. And those trends are going to continue unless there is some dramatic action and either a change in social values and corporate practices or a change in the rules under which the economy operates. So given that context, now we have the network taking another look at ourselves. John Johnston talks about the difference between working in the system and working on the system. Roman Next Generation is an opportunity for us to work on the system and to try to rethink what we are doing and how we are doing it in relationship to the causes and conditions of poverty today. So a key element of that is going to be the theory of change, which a group of 50-some people have been grappling with this for more than 2 years now, trying to come up with a conceptual framework at the national level that explains how community action is going to address the causes and conditions of poverty today. And as you all know, the theory of change can be adapted or modified into a local theory of change to fit your own conditions. A big step forward has been the IM 138 that laid out the new performance standards. The partnership took the lead in crafting those and ran the best, most open, inclusive process I've seen in decades and ever in community action to help OCS produce the performance standards for CAAs, states, and the federal agency itself. A major step forward. And if we don't get anything else done this year, IM 138 creates a wonderful new platform to help us think about the issues that we need to be addressing. I'm going to jump to CSBG information system. We've got national performance indicators that Barbara Mooney and NASCAS have been facilitating an intensive discussion. And believe me, you talk about people yelling and throwing chairs. It was like the good old days in Community Action Agency board meetings. You can't do that. No, you got to do it this way. What great fun. Anyhow, the national performance indicators, of course, you only fill these out if your agency is actually doing something in that area, and there's a room for other. If you are doing something not reflected in the national performance indicators, you can do that as well. So the white paper that we're talking about here is a paper, here's the national theory of change, now out for comment, and I know it's generating a lot of discussion and feedback. Recommended reading, the books that Alan and I have used in putting the white paper together. There's an enormous amount of new information and analysis about what the problems are in the American economy and why the middle class is shrinking, and excellent reading there. I've mentioned the new organizational standards. I'm going to come back to that. So in looking at the white paper that Alan and I are drafting for the partnership, what we're trying to do is an overview of the current economy and demographic trends and what community action might do about it. In other words, we're going to take the material that you've seen in this and in other webinars, and we're going to come up with a toolkit about how you use each of those fact pieces, not every one of them, but many of them, to draw down and do an analysis in your own community, how you use that national trend information in your community assessment. So we've got 9 sections in the white paper that we are preparing. One is just change the rules under which the economy operates. This is minimum wage, workplace standards, family leave, earned income tax credit, public works. What are all the kinds of things that we in community action might support to increase the number of jobs and the compensation for jobs and other ways in which people make a living? Human development, this is something that CAAs are pretty good at, but it's the difference between working on the demand side, i.e. the rules under which the economy operates, and the supply side, the people who are ready and willing to go to work. And there's already 10 million people who would work at a full-time job tomorrow if there were enough full-time jobs. But the supply side is, in my opinion, we're ready. And we've got people ready and willing to go to work, but the demand is not there, in part because the jobs have been shipped overseas, et cetera. So we're also going to look at safety net issues. What is the minimum floor, the anti-destitution floor, which we want every person in America to have, whether it's through food, housing, income. Is it time to resurrect the discussion about a guaranteed annual income, which we actually were engaged in the 60s and the 70s, and Richard Nixon supported that discussion. but that sort of went by the wayside. Perhaps it's time to think about that as a safety net issue. There are a number of things going on in family formation, birth rates, numbers of adults in the household producing income, et cetera, and we're trying to raise some issues there. The question about how we talk about poverty and economic security. Some research suggests that the term poverty began losing steam in the 1970s and into the 1980s, and then we need to reframe our discussion and talk about more cultural universals like economic security for everybody, food security for everybody, rather than using language about poverty. So this is another robust discussion taking place in the network. We're doing some international comparisons. The U.S. is behind. The U.S. is, we think of the U.S. as number one. We're number one. Well, we're not. We're number 12. We're number 17. We're number 22. On a number of international indicators, the U.S. has slipped in recent years, everything from high school graduation rates to health coverage rates, et cetera. Then another section in the white paper, we're looking at the probability of even more unhappy scenarios around, some people say it's the certainty of more unhappy scenarios around climate change, around our overutilization of petroleum and certain rare minerals, that we are going to run out of oil at some point, and what are we going to be ready for it? And the answer so far is probably not. We've got people who claim that there's an unlimited amount of oil and the oceans aren't going to rise. And so there are some even more negative scenarios than just a continuation of the current trends around job loss. And then we have a section about how do we bring about change, looping back to our theory of change and how we in community action can go about producing a better quality of life for everybody in America through changing the rules under which the economy operates, through creating alternative cultures in our local areas. Some of this is going to require advocacy on the part of CAA staff and boards and other organizations. How do we go about creating change in a community where you get everybody in a community to pull together in a big collaborative to try to bring about a change? We've got a whole new initiative going on that, which will be a good strategy for some CAAs and some communities to pull together with a large number of other organizations to try to bring about some change. So I'm going to come back to the challenge question here, we've got a little survey that we want to take here at the end of this. But our general challenge question in the white paper is that given all of these trends nationally, and given all the strategies that have been proposed by the Economic Policy Institute and the Center for American Progress, which of these make sense in your area? Which of these does your agency plan to support and try to bring into existence? And what new strategies will you select, identify, develop, or support to try to do something different from what we are now doing? My opinion is if we keep doing the same things we've been doing, the way we've been doing them, these trends are just going to get worse, and we do need some new strategies, and we want to help explore that. So I think with that, we're ready for our survey. Here's Alan's blog on the decline of the middle class, and again, when you download this entire PowerPoint, you can click on any of the hot links in it and then I guess, Tiffany, are you going to talk about this before we do the survey, or are you going to do that afterward? Okay, I think the next webinar coming up is April 6th, and one of the 9 learning communities is the 2-generation approach. This is being led by the Garrett County Community Action Committee and CAP Tulsa. And those two CAAs have been involved in building out the two-generation approach. Some people say CAAs have always been two-gen, working with the parents and the kids. And I think that's true. I've been involved in Head Start for decades, but there's a lot of new brain research, new nutrition research, new parenting research, and a lot of new methodologies that are now available to and being factored in. Oh, okay. Here we go with the survey on the right. Please answer, click the question and hit submit in the lower right-hand corner. We're trying to get a sense of what you think the unemployment rate is in this first question. So go ahead and click. You have 1 minute, I can see. Your 29 seconds are already, you're halfway through the 1 minute time limit for this survey question. So please click on your answer and hit submit. These questions are going to come at you pretty fast. Just finishing on the 2Gen webinar coming up April 6th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can click on the hot link there or just go to the partnership's website and you'll see the schedule for all of the webinars and you can register for them as to watch what the people in those working groups have to say. This webinar on national trends will be, this webinar series will be open to anybody who wants to participate, and we'll be sending out drafts of the paper for you to look at. Again, you'll be able to download the slides. So I think, are we done with, I thought that poll has ended. Okay. So there we see the results of that poll. About 10% below 5%. If it's 20% between 5 and 6, 19 between 6 and 8, still very high up there. And look at that, even a few 8 to 10% or above 10%. Wow. Okay. As a general proposition, the so-called frictional unemployment rate's about 4%. That's from deaths, job turnover, et cetera. Anything above that represents more people looking for work than there are job openings. Okay, let's go on to the next poll question. Okay, so we're looking for percentages here. What of the families you serve in your CAA, what percent have 2 or more adults in the household who are producing income for that household? What percent have one person producing income from whatever the source? And then what are the percent of families you serve that are single female heads of households? And then families with 1 child, families with 2 or more children. So you're just typing in a percentage here. So it would be like 50%, 20%, whatever the percentages are for each question. And you do all your percentages before you send it in. I hope my advice is correct here. Okay. Okay. Okay, I just sent mine in. Oh, we have 2 minutes on this one, and we're 43 seconds in. So do each of your percentages, then submit. Now, in the future, we will ask these questions and provoke discussion back during the webinar presentation itself. In other words, we will, so Lil says, don't have this information in my fingertips. This is what we call WAG, wild guess. We're just interested in your perception of what these numbers are, not your actual demographics. Because, again, most of us don't have this information at our fingertips. We're just trying to see how you perceive the structure of the My countdown clicker has stopped going. Something's happening.
Jim, I guess on the way those questions were phrased, this is Denise, you may not see a bar chart or anything like that. We may have to provide those to you separately.
I think you're right. We may need to do a compilation separately, right? This is our first time through using this specific whole system this year, so we may not have asked questions in a way that it can compile the data for you to see, but we'll do that later. Okay, so this is the next question. My question was there, then it disappeared. Okay, my third question in the chat disappeared.
Okay, we'll see what we can do to bring that back up for you.
Okay, here's the next question. We're asking the percent of people in your area who are unemployed but would like to work. So of your total service population, what percentage of them are unemployed but would like to work? And the second question is, what percentage have dropped out of your service population have dropped out of the workforce altogether? Third question, what percent are working part-time, would like to work full-time? Percent of people who are working temporary jobs but would like permanent jobs, and the percentage of people who are working full-time but the wages are not enough to support the family. We're just trying to get a sense of the subpopulations in your area among the group of people you serve who are in these different kinds of relationships to the economy.
And Jim, this is Denise. Maybe you could talk a little, while the poll is closing, your thoughts on the AEI Brookings report. I know you and Alan have done some comparison. From the way I read, a lot of their findings resonate with what you found.
Yeah, I think Denise is referring to a new report that came out of a consortium of organizations in Washington, D.C., the American Enterprise Institute, Brookings, I think there were the Center for American Progress, was it Heritage? Both conservative and liberal, if you will, think tanks, and their recommendations. A lot of their recommendations make sense in terms of how to go about improving the ability of people, improving the ability of people. I think our white paper looked at some topics beyond what they looked at. A lot of their recommendations, while useful, are what I would call conventional recommendations, flexibility on family leave, increasing the ability of people to earn overtime. I think the most remarkable thing about that report is that it reflects agreements between both conservative and liberal think tanks about anything. In other words, the fact that they've agreed on certain things, it's not the things themselves that are so unique, but rather this spectrum of organizations have agreed to them. I think that bodes well for future action in a Congress that's perhaps less partisan than the one we currently have. Okay, here's the next to the last question. For the people that are working part-time in the population you serve, what's the percent that work 2 different jobs? And what's the percent that work more than 2 jobs?
Jim, just to go on with the comparison of the Brookings report with our white paper, I might mention that there was a lot of overlap. That is to say, the topic areas that we picked up on and wrote about and provided our research was very much the same as was in the Brookings report. And we've given that information to Denise. We plan to do a little bit more on her follow-up questions that she had for us to do. As soon as we have time, we'll try to get to that.
Yeah, I think that paper and our white paper, we're chewing on the same questions. I hope that we have some even more dramatic solutions than they have, because again, theirs represents a consensus between conservative and liberal. And I'm hoping Alan and I are digging up a few things that are yet at the boundaries of discussion and that people have not yet agreed to, but that potentially over the years would come to agree to. Okay, I think this is our last question. Where do people work? Where are people working who are working? And you can pick 3 of your service population. Where are most people working?
Jim, we have one more question after that, and that deals with education, levels of education.
Okay, my mistake. I didn't see the. So we got one more question here. So, since the software is not tallying these, Cashin or Tiffany can send us the raw data. Alan and I will tally these, prepare a little report that we've asked the partnership to put up on the website.
Okay, we're getting ready to launch the last poll. While we're waiting on that, I want to also announce that the next poverty trend webinar presentation will occur on June the 29th. It'll be Wednesday, June 29th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time.
Oh, there we go. Okay, good. So this is our last question, right, Alan?
Right.
Okay. Of those people in your service population, what percent of them are high school dropouts? What percent have completed high school, have some higher education or training, and percent who are college graduates? Again, these are not scientific polls based on the facts in your agency. These are impressionistic. What's your general sense of the composition of the population with whom you're working? And what are their circumstances? So again, I'd like to thank the partnership for sponsoring this entire learning community project, and specifically our national trends. All the information that we produce will be up on the partnership website in the learning community section under the national trends button. And hopefully you'll be able to download that information and shape it and adapt it for your local needs. And as I said at the outset, we're going to be producing a toolkit that will assist you in taking this national trend and in converting that into a question that helps illuminate what's happening in your local area. So that toolkit will be coming over the course of the next few months. So with that, Alan, unless you have any closing comment, let's turn it back over to Tiffany.
No, Tiffany, it's all yours.
Well, thank you all very much for just the wealth of information that was shared. And I just want to reemphasize to us that, you know, at the end of the day, our end game is about moving families out of poverty and understanding the statistics and just the trends that are being expressed is just critical as our foundation as we think about innovative approaches to actually dealing with some of these causes and conditions of poverty. So we do invite you to tune in again for the next Poverty Trends presentation that I mentioned is scheduled for June 29th. Also, there's several other Learning Communities Resource Center webinar presentations scheduled throughout the spring, which we've already mentioned, the 2Gen webinar that will occur on April the 6th. If you would like to be involved in any of the conversations or have access to any of the resources available through the learning community, do contact myself or Natalie Kramer, and we will connect you as a follower or just to just what's happening in terms of our schedule of events. Finally, we want to invite everybody to the Partnership Annual Convention scheduled for August 30th through September 2nd. We will be in Austin, Texas, and so hopefully we can all convene together in person to continue exploring what it means to effectively fight poverty given today's age. We thank you again, Jim and Alan, and to all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to engage in this conversation. This concludes our webinar. Everybody have a great day. Take care.